try to mess with it, but I'm like, oh, dude, oh man, you had me for like 5 minutes because he's funny.
He is
Like
funny.
he's still funny,
He
but
is.
it's a little weird because with Rush, I could tell Rush, and I've seen Rush. I've seen interviews with Rush, and he basically admits, and that's why I use a wrestling analogy. When you see Rush like interviewed, his whole demeanor is different.
Mm-hmm.
He's a lot more humble. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, this is what I do. It's a job. Hopefully, I'll continue to be successful. But Alex Jones, I don't know. I don't know that he knows that it's a game. I'm concerned about that.
I think that he
And it's
gets.
just a little weird.
I think he gets so wrapped up in himself and the whole. Alex Jones is a big guy, and you use the wrestling scenario. He's
Right.
like the ultimate wrestler. He's like the smack talking wrestler is what he's like, and
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter what he said. He's just going to go on for 3 straight hours and talk smack.
Right.
I mean, even I still remember when he did the last or the second last Joe Rogan interview. He said, "You do know, Joe, that I was dropped on my head as a kid, and I just might be retarded." I mean, I thought, what? So even he was laughing at himself.
And that's cool. I
Yeah,
mean,
it is cool.
that,
It's
that
funny.
hearing something like that makes me feel a little better about him.
Uh huh.
When I listen to him, like the last few times, I'm like, whoa, this dude is serious.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he's not serious, but that's weird. I mean, he's really, the FEMA camps and the
Mm-hmm.
underground something, something,
Yeah.
something, which is funny because when I started listening to Alex Jones, he was going off on Glenn Beck for trying to scare people in
Right.
2010,
Uh huh.
you know, and then he was a big Ron Paul guy. But I think I noticed since Ron Paul's not going to be running anymore, I noticed that since then he's just that whole movement, whatever it is, the quote Liberty movement. I don't know what the heck it is now. The Liberty movement now is just like you, you I can't even what Liberty of what I can't even tell what country they're talking about
Yeah.
because their version of Liberty is like it's just basically we're going to say something that's offensive to some group, and then when you object to it, we're going to accuse you of trying to censor our freedom of speech. And I'm like, that's not libertarianism. That's not, that no, that trying to entrap people to be trying to entrap people to be wrong. And the left does that all the time too. The left does it too. But the problem is that the left after after um after MSNBC, their influence really doesn't go very far.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe a little bit of stuff on the internet, but they really don't. I mean, liberal media, talk radio is not. It's not a factor. Whereas locally, conservative talk radio is still dominant. Unfortunately, like you said, it's getting to the point where it's not entertaining anymore. So why are people listening at this point?
Well,
I don't know what the answer is.
I think it's I think there's less money all the time in talk radio, period. In radio,
Yes.
period. There's less money than
Yeah.
there used to be. I mean, Jack Carney, when he was, the king of the 9 to noon slot on KMOX, Jack Carney had a house. His house was on Lindell Boulevard, just the other side of Forest Park. And you know what those houses look like.
Yes.
That was a local radio guy who lived in that house. Okay. I'm sure his son, John Carney, couldn't rent a room in that house. I mean, I don't know what John Carney makes, but I'm sure he doesn't make what his dad made.
Right.
And I had an opportunity to work at 93.3. I interviewed with them and they offered me a position. And we'll just say I turned it down because let's just say we had a huge disagreement on how I was to be compensated. And we'll leave it at
Right.
that. But there's just no money in it. And I almost think that
Right.
people want to get more sensationalized and more sensationalized. It's like pornography. Back in the day, if a gal shows her boobies, that's a big deal. Well,
Right.
now, you had to go a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. And you can only go so far and you've
Right.
jumped the shark. Talk radio is the same way. Well, if we get a little bit more extreme, a little bit bizarre, a little bit more out there, then I will be the guy that everybody listens to. There was a guy, and I did a show with him one time at KLPW. Mike Pate had a panel one time, and I was on it. And this guy, John Moore, calls himself the Liberty Man. Smart guy. Had a good conversation with him. Okay, yeah. But he made this statement on his Facebook page that, okay, trust me, if you get the vaccine in 1 year, everyone who gets the vaccine will be dead. And I responded, in 1 year, will you come on? I've had the vaccine. In 1 year, will you come on my podcast and admit that you're wrong? Of course, no response. But to say that, it's ridiculous. Why did he say it? And hundreds of people said, "Oh, John, thank you so much for educating me." You didn't educate them. You ran your mouth about something you know nothing about and scared a bunch of old people.
It was, I mean, that is the weird thing about this, and my real big problem. Because here's the thing, man. I will say this. As a person who did not like Trump, and I'm glad he's gone. I'm not glad Joe Biden's president. But I'm glad Trump's gone. And that was the only way to get it done. Okay. That was my calculus. Mm-hmm. Okay. I will say this without any equivocation. The Democrats did use COVID-19 to beat him. That was the idea. I will also say something else that I think I don't see a lot covered. I think the Democrats, because of the way they treated mainly the lockdowns, specifically the lockdowns, because we know now the lockdowns didn't work. You notice they don't ever defend the lockdowns.
Never.
Now they're into this mask thing, which is why I think I'm a little suspicious of the mask mandate. I don't have a problem with people wearing masks. I think if you think you need to wear a mask, if your doctor says you should wear a mask, that makes all the sense in the world to me. If you're saying Joy Reid and Chris Hayes say you need to wear a mask, well, they're not wearing one now when they're on TV. Why aren't they wearing one now? Mm-hmm. Because they don't want to wear one. Because it's better not to wear one if you don't have to wear one. So if they're not wearing one when they're talking to you on TV, then that's a reason why you might not want to wear one if you don't think you're at risk. They think in the situation that they are in that they're not at risk. You think in the situation you're in, you're not putting people at risk. That could very well be the reason why people don't want to wear them. They're actually trying to say, if you don't want to wear a mask, even if you're vaccinated, James, that you're trying to kill people. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense either. Yeah,
it doesn't.
You're cutting their own. They're saying get vaccinated because that's the way to get out of this, but you should still wear a mask. And they're like, well, the mask is mostly to protect other people. And then they call the unvaccinated the most evil. They call them a bunch of killers. They call them a bunch of Trump supporters. So I'm like, well, so you want me to wear a mask to save people that you basically say you don't give a crap about? It doesn't make sense. But then the right is taking it to the other side saying, well, this vaccine, people are, like I saw this one guy, is a black conservative named Terrence something Griffin or something. And he's like, yeah, Abbott got the vaccine. And he's fully vaccinated, and yet he still got COVID. What's that about? Does that mean the vaccine doesn't work? No, it doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work. The vaccine isn't supposed to stop you from testing positive. And so they have a good point, but then they screw it up. Yeah. The right screws it up by being so extreme.
Yeah. And again, once upon a time, when I was a boy, a young man, even a not so young man, maybe not so much today because KMOX has changed. But if I wanted to hear what was really going on, you turn on KMOX because they're going to give you the facts. Okay. It's not that way on radio anymore. You can't turn on the radio and because it's almost all. I'm not going to say all. It's much of it. Most of it is just people talking smack.
Yeah.
It's Alex Jones. I mean, and who they've banned from the airwaves. Well, not they haven't banned him from the airwaves. I actually heard him on a radio station in the southeast not too long ago. He was actually on the radio on one of those stations. So there are a few stations that still carry Alex Jones show, but he's not on the internet because he just lies. Well, they kind of all do. So he's no different from them.
Well, I mean, it's not just that they lie. It's they all have a common theme of your America has been taken away from you.
Right.
Like they have this America, which is what caused me to reject the Tea Party because I was cool with the idea. I was cool with what Ron Paul was saying. I was
Mm-hmm.
cool with the idea of not allowing the federal government to take everybody's money. I was cool with that. But then they started talking about how well we need to get people started saying things like in the Tea Party. This is back in 2010. The first hint I had when there was a problem was when I went to a Tea Party rally in Washington in 2009. This is before I started going on radio
Mm-hmm.
with them. And one of the guys was up there. He's from something called the Sam Adams Institute. I didn't know what it was at the time. Just another right wing think tank, but they passed themselves off as being. There was no grassroots, or by the way, there were no grassroots organizations doing anything in St. Louis at the time. If you look them all up, they're all funded by some huge organization out of state. Almost all of them. You know, Sam Adams, all the LPAC, all that stuff. He said something, so he's up there in Washington. You know, I'm the only black person there. I'm the only black person there. And he says, boom, 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 and we're gonna do this and that. And then he says, and this can be our Fort Sumter moment. And I'm like, what? Wait, what did he say? And then 10 minutes later, this guy walks by me in a Confederate uniform. And I'm like, did I just see someone walk by me in a Confederate uniform? And I didn't think much of it. I'm like, whatever. Then you see these people walking around in these 1976 outfits.
1776.
Yeah, 1776.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell?
You thought you were at Comic-Con.
It was just it was. I mean, it took me a while to realize that some of these people were absolutely nuts.
Yeah. Now,
I mean,
the first Tea Party event I went to, and they didn't have it in St. Louis, but it was in South Carolina. I was seeing a customer. He knew I was interested in it. He said, hey, there's going to be a Tea Party rally around lunchtime. You want to come? Sure. So we did some business. We went and saw this thing. And it was probably 150 people standing outside. They were just talking and this and that. One guy got up and talked and said, I'm State Representative so-and-so, I'm Republican from the 17th District, and blah, 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 blah. And they cut him off. They said, I'm sorry, sir, this is not a political platform. This is a platform for the people, so you'll have to step down. And everybody applauded, and then somebody else got up. That was very early on, and I thought, wow, this Tea Party thing's pretty doggone good. Well, by the time they had it in St. Louis, or actually in Washington, because Diane Jones from KLPW was there, Dana Lash was there, and I had the responsibility of kind of being the roving reporter, man on the street, and the producer of the whole thing.
Was that in 2009 or?
I don't even remember. Probably somewhere around there. It was the big Tea Party rally that they had on the riverfront in Washington, Missouri.
No, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one I went to.
Yeah. Okay. And at that time, I saw just what you saw. I thought, this isn't anything like it was in South Carolina.
Right. It was weird.
Yeah,
it was because Dana Lash was there.
Yeah.
And I remember she was saying, and that's one of the reasons why I trusted her a little bit, is because she was noticing that, and she got up there and she says, she was on the air and she said, hey, some of you guys are saying some crazy stuff. Like the main thing was the birthers. They were really trying to keep the birthers out of the movement, or at least publicly out. And that's one thing Jamie and even Dana, she was never always opposed to people like J.D. Hayworth and Mark Williams. You know, the guy who ran Tea Party, I think it was Tea Party Nation. Mark Williams was the first guy to get in trouble. He ran one of the big Tea Party groups, and he wrote this letter. Like this is like about that time that you're talking about, maybe like a month couple months after, he wrote something saying that black people were better off as slaves because at least they weren't on welfare and their families were intact. And Dano's like, forget this guy. And I'm like, okay, cool. And generally people were like, yeah, this guy's nuts.